Well, good morning or good evening or good afternoon, my lovely students. Now things are going to get interesting, baby. We're going to take on this topic of Islam, this topic that ties Americans in knots, this topic that causes great anxiety among a lot of Americans. It's time that we gained a perspective and understanding for this amazing faith. This faith that claims 20% of the world's population. This faith that is growing in popularity on a regular basis. But at the same time, there's aspects of this faith that are terrifying today. The specter of ISIS is something that Americans are justifiably extremely paranoid about. So, boy, this is an important topic. Sometimes you think of our other topics and you think, well, they're interesting, they're not as relevant to me. This one, there's no question, it's relevant to everyone. And when we start talking about our essential questions, we're going to be dealing with two essential questions in this presentation. The first one is, how does the geography of the Arabian Peninsula figure into the story of Islam? And the answer is, it has a tremendous influence on the story of Islam. In many ways, it created the story of Islam. So the first thing is about geography. Geography of the Arabian Peninsula. The other essential question is, what's the deal with Mecca? Do you realize that when Muslims pray, they face this incredibly significant city in modern Saudi Arabia, the hometown of Muhammad, where it all got started. And we need to understand the story of this incredibly significant city to understand anything about Islam. Okay, now, here we go. I'm going to show you a map. I'm going to show you a map of Asia. We're going to focus in on the Arabian Peninsula. And I want to talk about what an amazing place this is. Now, if you're out in space and you're just cruising around in a spaceship and you look down on the Asian landmass, it's massive. I mean, you know, Europe's over here, it's tiny. The Eurasian landmass is dominated by the continent of Asia. And here's the Ural Mountains in Russia, which is the dividing line. But there's lots of dry regions in Asia. Right up here, the Taklamakan Desert, the Gobi Desert, the plateau of Tibet are pretty dry and barren. You look over here at Iran and Iraq and Kazakhstan, and these places are barren. And then you come down here to this amazing place called the Arabian Peninsula, which really sticks out. Now, the border between Africa and Asia would be the Suez Canal. This is the Sinai Peninsula right here. But this massive piece of territory right here is one of the most barren places on Earth. It's called the Arabian Peninsula. You know, over here would be the Sahara Desert, which is the largest in the world. But this is the Arabian Peninsula. Now, if you think about the country of Saudi Arabia, which dominates this area today, there's very few people living there because the place is so daggone dry. I mean, look at this area right in here in particular. When I show you a map of modern Saudi Arabia, there's no one living here. It's that barren. So we're going to talk about this amazing place. And here's a modern map of Arabia. And it has a number of countries on it, the dominant being Saudi Arabia. But if you look in the northern portion, what you see are the countries of Iraq and Jordan and Israel and Syria. And these areas are actually, they have some rainfall, they have some rivers. There are some population centers there. So one thing I want you to understand is when it comes to this area, most of the manufacturing processes, products and markets are up here in the northern part. And then there are sporadically some settlements through Arabia, and then right here, baby, there's nothing. This portion of the Arabian Peninsula is called, very appropriately, the empty quarter. Then when you get down into modern Yemen and Oman, you start to have a little more rainfall. So this would be the agricultural area down here in the south, the empty area right here, the manufacturing part and the population centers are up here. But the south is also important because what you have is strategic crossroads. And strategic just means in an important place. And so this is a crossroads between trade that goes on between Africa and India. So that's the geography of the Arabian Peninsula. Now when you talk about this, once again, this whole peninsula is incredibly dry. It looks like the surface of the moon, a really hot moon, by the way. And one of the big stories about the economy of the Arabian Peninsula, that's what I have abbreviated there, AP, is exchanging manufacturing products in the north with agricultural products in the south, and the transfer of products across the barren interior. That's the whole economy of the Arabian Peninsula in a nutshell. This is long before there was oil discovered there, and of course it became what it is today. This is back in the day, way prior to the Industrial Revolution. Now there is a couple products in southern Arabian Peninsula, in modern day Yemen and modern day Oman, that are really interesting. You've probably heard of them. Frankincense and myrrh. So, people might ask, what are these things? Well, they're wonderful spices that have spiritual, medicinal, and ritual significance to Jews, Christians, and later Muslims. So these are these valuable spices that can be found in this really barren area that have great meaning to a lot of people. It's like oil today. Oil is very important, very valuable, comes from a very barren place. That was frankincense and myrrh back in the day. And I really like the symbolism and where this stuff comes from. This is a boswellia tree, which is where you get frankincense. As you can see, it is one of the hardiest trees on earth that can grow virtually in solid rock. That's how resilient this tree is. Here's an image right here of a myrrh tree, very similar. And when you have to harvest this spice, what you have to do is you have to wound the tree. You have to make a cut in the tree, kind of like taking maple syrup from a maple tree. You have to have it bleed, and then you take the sap and create this wonderful spice. Okay, now everything in the Arabian Peninsula changed dramatically with the introduction of the camel. Now, I like to say that the Arabian Peninsula was like an antiquated UPS system. In other words, like all that happened were people transported products from north to south or from south to north, and this was done through something called caravans. Now, these caravans took a quantum leap forward around 400 CE. This is after Jesus. Notice the CE, not BCE, with the introduction of the Asian camel, which is called the ship of the desert. And you need to think about the Arabian Peninsula kind of like a body of water that you have to transport across. It created a vastly superior form of travel. Caravans across the empty quarter became more profitable, and the city of Mecca, which we're going to talk about soon, grew in importance. And once again, this camel did not even come to the Arabian Peninsula until 400 years after Jesus. Okay, now it's time to focus on Mecca. So once again, here is the Arabian Peninsula right here. And this big red dot on the far western side of the Arabian Peninsula is Mecca. If you look, it's not a port city. It's actually a number of miles inland, and these are not easy miles. These are barren, mountainous miles. This is going to be a very, very important place. It's halfway between Yemen and Syria, so it's a great halfway point. It is far enough away from the Red Sea to be impervious by attack. And so what this is going to be, I want you to think of this as a port city. In other words, if you're traveling from here to here, you're going to stop right here. You're going to stop right here and spend some time and regroup and replenish your supplies. Now, not only did it become a port city, but it was like, have you ever heard like stories about sailors on shore leave? Not only is it going to be a place where you refuel, it's also going to be a place where you cut loose. It's kind of like the Las Vegas of its day. What happens in Mecca stays in Mecca. So often these hardy dudes that were part of these caravans would land in Mecca and they would go berserk. They would smoke tons of hash. They would visit houses of prostitution. They would do what sailors have been notorious to do throughout time. Now, let me go a little further here. This is an important phrase, the Quraysh clan. These were the people who ran the city of Mecca. Now, this character right here, his name is Aben Manaf. Now, it's not important that you remember that name, but here it is what is important. His grandson is going to be the Prophet Muhammad. They ran Mecca, and they profited tremendously from this reputation as being a port city where people in caravans could cut loose. Okay, now, I just said that Mecca was kind of like Las Vegas. Well, in another way, it was not like Las Vegas at all, and I'm going to explain that here momentarily. The question is, it's 400 years after Jesus. What's the religion of the Arabs? Well, have you ever heard the phrase animist before? Animist just means that you worship forces of nature, like the wind or the sun or the moon. That was prominent in the Arabian Peninsula. Tribal faiths were prominent in the Arabian Peninsula. But also, they had been exposed to Christianity and Judaism, and there were many Arabs who were Christians, and there were many Arabs who were Jews. And so they had a strong tradition of Christian and Jewish influence in the Arabian Peninsula. And one story that's common to Christians, that's common to Jews, was very powerful as far as the Arabs were concerned. And by the way, I want to say something right now. If you were to ask most Americans, what is an Arab? They might say, well, it's a Muslim. Or they might say, it's a person who's dark complected who lives in the Middle East. That is not accurate. Simply, an Arab is someone who has Arab as their native language. So people from the Arabian Peninsula who speak Arab are Arabs. People in Iraq, people in Egypt, who don't live in the Arabian Peninsula, but who have embraced Islam and Arab is their native language, they are Arabs. That's very important. So, Arabs have this identity that ties back to this story of Abraham. Now, you folks that are Christians, that went to Sunday school as little kids and learned about the Old Testament, the story is simple. What you have is you have this man called Abraham, the father of the Hebrews, and he is asked by God to demonstrate his faith. And he asked him to sacrifice his son called Isaac, which he is willing to do. He puts the kid on a rock, he gets ready to pull out a sword and slice him to bits, and this angel comes and says, the Lord knows that you're willing to do this, hence you don't have to. And if you look off to the side, this poor ram is going to be roached instead. It's tangled up in this bush. This is from an Italian artist back in the 1600s called Domenichino. Domenichino. I love this picture. I love this imagery right here. But get ready. The Arabs have the same exact story. But it's not Isaac that's about to be sacrificed. It's his brother called Ishmael. So Arabs, Jews, Christians, Muslims all have this story, although the actors have been changed around a little bit. Now, remember that story, and then I got to talk about these two very important structures in Mecca itself. It's what is the Kaaba and what is the Well of Zamzam. Okay, this is a place inside Mecca So let's say that you pray and you're a Muslim and you're in the city of Mecca. You're actually going to face somewhere in the city itself. You're going to face toward this structure right here. And if you look, all these little black specks are people's heads. This is a pretty sizable structure. Now, this is what the Arabs believe. Arabs believe that Abraham constructed this cubicle, you know, probably 1,000 years before Jesus was even around, on the spot where he almost sacrificed Ishmael. The building is called the Kaaba. And if you're familiar at all with Roman history, what the Kaaba was to the Arabs prior to Islam was kind of like a pantheon. It was an empty cube where there were lots of different images of gods. And Mecca was not only a place where you could go and you can cut loose and be a crazy person. It was also a place where you could come and worship whatever god you chose in this place called the Kaaba. Now today, there's none of those idols there, as we're going to learn. It is the most holy shrine in Islam, and once in your life you need to visit this place. And I'm going to talk more about what takes place when you visit this place soon. Now, as the story goes, when Ishmael was not sacrificed, he cried out to God in great thirst. And God made a well spring out of the desert about 20 meters from the Kaaba. It is called the Well of Zamzam. And once in your life, if you're a Muslim, you're going to go to the Kaaba, you're going to circle around the Kaaba, and then you're going to drink from the Well of Zamzam. We're going to see this in this video that we see. And so that's what's going on in this part of the world. The geography of the Arabian Peninsula is important, and also the city of Mecca is extremely important. All right, people.